Why don't we start with Richard Christie. He's a Deputy District Attorney for the County of Los Angeles. Richard?
For years I appeared in court on a daily basis, and then I was assigned to training where I was not appearing on a regular basis. And then one day, after not being in court for 5 or 6 years, I went in one day with a group of new DAs, and I noticed that virtually every case on the calendar was a drug case. Marijuana, cocaine, heroin, something like that. And I said, God, it's like the whole calendar is nothing but drugs. And I began to say, you know, we're spending all our time on drugs, and as I looked at the defendants, I said, you know, they don't really look that bad to me. For all the terrible stories I hear about drug usage, these people, many of whom have been using for years, just didn't look that wasted to me. They were not that destroyed. And then I'm reading the newspaper. A couple things in the newspaper sort of caught my attention. Here they're arresting another athlete for using drugs. Well, this guy's playing his best season, and he's using cocaine. How bad can this stuff be? Then I'm reading about, you know, some Hollywood producer arrested, cocaine. Well, if it's so bad, how come this guy produced the greatest, most popular movies in town? And then I read about a robbery down where I live in Orange County. 2 young boys killed, murdered in a robbery by one of their friends who wanted money to buy cocaine. And I said, you know, based upon my own observations in court, and I've been working in court now for 27 years, I said, it's not the drugs that are really causing trouble. People use drugs. Some people have trouble with them. Most people don't. It's kind of like alcohol. A small percentage can have adverse effects. I don't encourage drug use, by the way, and it still is against the law, and I still prosecute the cases every day. But I said it's not the use of the drugs that's really causing the trouble. It's the fact that it's illegal, and people have to steal to get the money to buy it because it's expensive and high-priced, and because you have the gang wars. I said, you know, if we legalized it, made it available in stores, people would simply go to the store, buy their drugs like they do alcohol, take them home, use them, and we would have no trouble. We wouldn't have these gang fights. When alcohol was illegal, then there was a lot of crime, just as there is crime now because drugs are illegal. If we legalized it, all these drive-by shootings would stop, the crack houses would all close down, the neighborhood drug dealers would all be out of business, people would simply go to a store and buy it. What about when people say, you know, I'm using too much, I'd like to stop? Well, there's a criminal stigma now associated with drug use. If drugs were legalized, that criminal stigma would be gone, and people would feel free to go to treatment centers. Also, if drugs were legalized, the billions of dollars we spend now in trying to interdict drugs, a lot of that money could go to treatment centers, so we would have money for that, money for the people that want to stop using. Right now, if you want to stop using drugs, the treatment centers are crowded and kind of unpleasant. Also, an enormous percentage of the time of the average policeman, prosecutor, bench officer is spent on drug cases. There are many much more serious crimes that we really don't have time to get into. There's an enormous amount of fraud going on. There's an enormous amount of, these are major frauds, and this isn't committed just to get a little money to buy some cocaine. These are guys doing it strictly for the money. There are civil cases that are being unresolved because of the fact that the courts are crowded with criminal cases. The courts would be free to handle more serious business, more important business, if we weren't busy spending all our time with drugs. And the police would be able to concentrate on the rapists and some of the other more serious crimes. But a lot of crimes would stop if drugs were legalized because an enormous percentage of the burglaries, robberies, carjackings, thefts, forgeries are committed by people who need money to buy high-priced illegal drugs. If drugs were legal, they could be cheap. They could be basically, you know, $3 or $4 a day and buy you all you need, kind of the same with alcohol. Cigarette use, alcohol use has fallen way off because it's sort of socially unacceptable. Nobody brags any longer about how much alcohol they can drink, and they used to years ago. Nobody laughs at the funny drunk. There's nothing funny about it anymore. That same social control would be effective in slowing down the use of drugs. All the crime problems that we now attribute and social problems we now attribute to drug use are really because drugs are illegal and hard to get, and you have to pay a lot of money to get them. If we legalized it, virtually every crime problem, every social problem we have that we attribute to drug use would come to an end. If we are to save our society from further degradation relating to drugs, we better start legalizing these things now.
Okay, the next speaker is Chris Conrad. He's the chief proponent for the California Hemp Initiative, and he's also the author of Hemp Lifeline to the Future.
First, we have some other international obligations. The Universal Declaration on Human Rights states that people have a right to practice their religion, not just to believe in it, but to practice in public or in private their religions. And I hope that you're aware of the Rastafari Church, the Coptic Christian Church, the Hindu churches, and the Muslim uses of cannabis as being a sacrament, which is not only guaranteed by the international law, but it's also guaranteed by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. And yet the United States has not allowed this to occur. What's going on in Europe right now is a lot of countries have reinterpreted their approach to it. So they have the Frankfurt Resolution, wherein about 21 cities and states around Europe have agreed to stop enforcing the prohibition laws as a matter of harm reduction, which is exactly what he described a moment ago. That, for example, a Dutch policeman explained it to us this way, is if they see a junkie with some heroin, if they take the heroin away from that junkie, he's going to have to go out and steal something to get the money to go back to the black market and buy more heroin. So it creates two other crimes instead of just letting the person have the heroin and fall asleep for the rest of the afternoon. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the U.S. says that we have equal protection for everybody under the Constitution. Now, in Switzerland and Germany, they've interpreted that to compare alcohol users to cannabis users, and they've come to the conclusion that that is not equal treatment, and so they're allowing cannabis consumption in both of these major parts of both of these countries right now as a result of that.
Our next speaker is Bruce Margolin. He's the director of LA Normal. He's also a candidate for Assembly. And he will also share his time with Dale Geringer, who is representing California Normal.
As Bart Simpson would say, you're being duped, kiddies, in kiddie land, because in fact what's happening is it's a major industry to lock people up. I'm not here to stand on the premise of Democrat versus Republican, but I will inform you that of such things as Pete Wilson getting $1 million a year from the Prison Guards Association for his campaign coffers since he ran for office, coupled with the fact there's additional monies coming in from all the construction workers with regard to building the prisons. And of course, it is a big industry with regard to the prosecution of cases, with regard to the courts, with regard to all the other services that are attached to it. So the whole program is a business to put people in jail, and it's a business to keep them in jail. And I think we're the ones who are going to be suffering because all the other services are not going to be available. It's going to cause more people in jail. So these laws, these strict, harsh penalties, they're supposed to be there for deterrent. But in fact, they aren't deterrent because the public doesn't know the consequences of criminal acts. And I suggest that if we don't have a course in school, junior high school, in college, and high school, that tells people the basic sentencing laws, they don't mean a thing. What difference does it make if there's increased penalties for violent crimes against the aged, unless people know about it before they commit the offense? So for those who don't know what NORMAL is, I'll make a quick introduction about what it is. It's a national organization to reform marijuana laws. It's been in existence since approximately 1973, and its purpose is to bring to the public the knowledge and education concerning the issue.
And worst of all, on the third strike, any felony at all is a third strike once you've got two bad offenses. And of course, growing marijuana is a felony. Possessing most drugs other than marijuana can be a felony. Possessing cocaine and heroin are always a felony. A lot of us criticized it. I came there to criticize this. I say it was totally inappropriate to be sending people to prison for 25 years to life for simply possessing cocaine or growing marijuana. I was joined in that view, I am happy to say, by an impressive number of district attorneys from throughout the state, from Los Angeles County, in fact, from Contra Costa County up where we are, Ventura County, said that indeed the three strikes bill was too broad, but it passed anyway. And one of the most revealing things that happened was Governor Wilson sent in a representative from his Office of Criminal Justice Planning to discuss their position on the bill. And the governor did not want to commit himself to any one of the competing three strikes bills that were available, only one of which was really abominable, the one that passed. But the governor's position was that generally he favored tougher punishments, wider nets. So they asked this man, who is from the Office of Criminal Justice Planning, what the cost of such proposals might be, and he admitted, well, we haven't done the cost estimates yet. So no price is too high to pay when you're paying off an important political constituency, in this case the law enforcement prison complex in California, which has sort of become the military-industrial complex of the 1990s.
If you look back to our history of alcohol prohibition, you will see that the year following the repeal of alcohol prohibition, we had a 70% drop in violent crime. And the crime continued to decrease until the beginning of the Second World War. I am confident within myself that if we were to change from our drug prohibition laws, which are very similar in many ways to alcohol prohibition laws, we will see an almost immediate drop in violent crime. You and I, as voters and as taxpayers, have made cocaine the most lucrative crop in the history of man, by far. We are telling our people, our young people as well as our not so young people, that probably you will never be able to do anything in your life that will result in your making as much money as you can now by selling these drugs. That is not what we want to tell our people. We are telling particularly our young people in our inner city areas and almost everywhere else that your role models are not the people who work hard during the day, go to school at night in an effort to better themselves and their family. No, the role models today are who? Are the people who are selling drugs, wearing the gold jewelry, reaching into their pockets for little pocket change and providing the $300 or $400 out of pocket change to their mothers to pay next month's rent. These are the people who are getting the attention of our youth today. And this is simply not working. What do we do about it? Well, in my view and in the view of numbers of us, what we must do is grab together our most experienced people, our most knowledgeable people nationwide from a panorama of experiences, and have a neutral commission appointed by the President, appointed by Congress, as publicly and fully as possible to look into this entire situation. We are seriously misspending the money that we have. We have talked about prisons. We must be aware that in the last 10 years in the state of California, we have regretfully built 13 new state prisons. 13. Bringing us up to the total of 28 as of this time. We have gone, as has been stated before, from something on the order of 32,000, at least according to my statistics, 32,000 people incarcerated in our state prison system 10 years ago to 130,000 now, $30,000 to $35,000 per person. We are having more prisons on the drawing board and actually under construction right now. So as I understand it, by the year 2000, even setting aside anything from 3 strikes and you're out, we're going to have an additional 10 prisons in operation by the year 2000. We have built no new universities in our state in the same period of time. Business groups, professional groups, church groups, and the rest. Let's join together. Let's not shout at each other. Instead, let's look for a better solution. If you are interested in joining us with this, take a copy of our resolution, think about it, read it, of course, make copies, circulate it amongst your friends, sign it, and send it back.
Our next speaker is Terry Smerling. He's a former staff attorney with the ACLU and currently sits as judge of the Superior Court in Pasadena.
Well, this forum puts me in a rather unusual position. For the first time that I can recall, I'm called upon to at least partially defend the status quo, because I am against the legalization. I suppose I'm the only panel member up here that is. I'm instead in favor of dramatically changing the way the criminal justice system deals with drug offenders, and have been for years. Now, on the subject of drugs and crime, I profess some expertise because my job for the last 12 years has been to process drug addicts. That's what criminal judges do. They process drug addicts. I'd say conservatively 75 to 80% of people we see in criminal court are there because of drugs, either because they're charged with a drug offense, they're charged with some behavior that's aberrant because it was committed under the influence of drugs, or they're charged with stealing to obtain drug money. And as a consequence, there's been this enormous growth in the prison industry in our state, and I won't parrot facts that have already been recited, but it's just incredible. The United States is the #1 incarcerator in the entire world. Our rate of incarceration is 4 times that of China. And the prison system is growing like crazy, and sometime this year we're going to end up spending more money on prisons than we spend on higher education, the first time in California's history. Incarceration has almost no effect on drug addiction. An offender can go to prison for a long stretch of time and assuming, quite hypothetically, that person can't get drugs in prison, still when that person comes out, that person is an addict. It will immediately turn back to drugs. There's no connection at all between incarceration and dampening the appetite for drugs. What I would suggest is a number of things. Putting people into residential treatment, which is the best way we know of at this time of treating people who are addicted. About 1/3 of those persons who complete the treatment are clean after a 2-year period, and another third have reduced their use substantially. And that incarceration doesn't have anywhere near that effect on drug use. Probation these days is a joke. I mean, probation means a probation officer supervising hundreds or maybe even thousands of probationers. There's no meaningful supervision. For a cost of a mere $5,000 a year, we could reduce caseloads to 25 probationers per probation officer and have meaningful supervision of people, and watching them in treatment, watching them in job training and the like. And that is only 1/5 the cost of incarceration. Incarceration runs about $25,000 a year.
Our next speaker is Judy Osborne. She is the author of Spectre of Forfeiture and the editor of Fear Chronicles, Forfeiture Endangers American Rights. She's here today.
One of the worst casualties in the war on drugs is our Constitution. And I won't spend time with the whole litany. Obviously, you already know. I would just add a quick word of warning regarding forfeiture laws, which will be around unless we do something after we end prohibition. There are over 200 federal statutes with forfeiture attached. Many of those do not even contain protections for innocent owners. In fact, one new interpretation of a 1989 law last year, the government decided to press a case to see if they could actually forfeit a man's home based upon a misstatement in a loan application. Under FIREA, Savings and Loan Crisis legislation, any false information on an application is considered to be intentional fraud, and you may have any property you bought with that loan forfeited. It is up to you to prove that the misstatement on the application that may have been made many years earlier was either accidental or legitimate, because as all forfeiture in rem proceedings go, it is the property itself that is presumed to be guilty. We do have before the House of Representatives now in committee a bill, H.R. 3347, the Asset Forfeiture Justice Act, that would require the government to prove its case by clear and convincing evidence. It would establish a right to the trial by jury with assistance of counsel. It would limit disproportionate forfeitures, and it would require conviction of the owner for the crime upon which the forfeiture is based before property may be seized. Perhaps most importantly, it would eliminate the fiscal incentives that distort law enforcement priorities by transferring forfeited proceeds directly to state treasuries to be distributed by law rather than to the seizing agencies who have been forfeiting property on a commission-type basis. So thank you. Please write your congressman, tell him to co-sponsor H.R. 3347, and write your senators and tell them to introduce companion legislation. We have a tremendous wide range of support for this reform, especially among conservative Republicans, actually.
Our final speaker is Alan Friel. He's a staff attorney with the ACLU.
Before I went to law school and subsequently became an ACLU staff attorney, I worked in the intelligence division of the Drug Enforcement Administration, and many of you may think that that's a bit of an oxymoron, but it was an interesting experience for me, and it was the first time that I was a part of what really is a middle-class social work program, and that is the drug war. It employs a lot of lawyers and employs a lot of police officers and correctional officials and social workers and psychiatrists and psychologists, and in doing so, while allowing a lot of people to have comfortable middle-class lifestyles, it prevents us from promulgating good public policy. And if our goal was really to address a social issue, and that is substance abuse. We would be doing so in a way that would best benefit society, and the criminal justice model of addressing substance abuse does not do that. To me, the more damaging aspect of the way we're addressing substance use and abuse in this country by making everything except alcohol and tobacco illegal is the black market that's created. And for a year and a half with the DEA, I did several studies on the nexus between drugs and violence. My studies were grossly manipulated by the DEA for budgeting purposes. But basically what I found was that there are really no criminogenic drugs that make you commit violent acts, with the possible exception of amphetamines and alcohol. There's a distinct nexus between violent acts and alcohol use and amphetamine use, but there have been no studies that show that the actual use of the drugs causes you to do it. Those are the only two drugs that I would say that there's a close violence drug use nexus. As far as violence in and of itself, this was during the 80s. I found that in the cities that I looked at, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., New York, and Los Angeles, with the majority of the emphasis on Atlanta because that's where our district office was, only about 10% of all homicides could be called drug-related. 50% of all homicides were domestic. And if we really wanted to reduce violence, we'd be putting as much money into reducing domestic violence as we would into the drug war. Of those 10% that were drug-related, the majority of them were systemic drug violence. That is, violence that was only because there's a black market in drugs. There was a small percentage that were economic compulsive. That is, someone committed a crime in order to get the money to buy the drugs, and we really don't know how many of the other sort of burglary, robbery-related crimes might have also fallen into that if we had known the person's particular motivation. But then again, that is only created because there is a black market in drugs. Of that percentage that was systemic drug violence because of the black market, within the late 80s, it skyrocketed from, it was originally about a 2% to being about 10% overall, and it quit being one-on-one, drug dealer gets pissed off at drug buyer, shoots him, to being organized, assault rifles, machine guns, 4 or 5 participants at one time, drive-by shootings, agents being killed, and we also were able to track that also matched the rise in crack cocaine coming of age, which of course is a drug that was created by a clamp down on cocaine in the powder, which is a much safer form. More people need to, as Judge Gray said, come out of the closet about that, because so many people that are sitting here at these tables are players in that middle-class conspiracy. And it's just not safe for our politicians to say, well, yeah, I think this is bad public policy and we should look at rational ways of addressing the issue, because they can get reelected by sort of saber rattling and saying build more prisons and zero tolerance on drugs. And I think we as citizens should say we're not going to accept that. That's not what we're putting people in office for. We're electing people to pursue good public policy that is going to make our society operate in a more effective way. And certainly what we're doing now isn't. And I feel very honored to be at a table with as many people who are working towards changing that. Thank you.
Okay, let's take some questions from all of you.
I'd be curious on a show of hands here in the audience how many people either have used marijuana or have friends who use marijuana who think that right ought to be respected just like the rights of alcohol. Okay.
We have to get involved in a program of just say no, to be honest with you, but no is of course spelled K-N-O-W. And as soon as we do that, we will make progress. Right this minute, there is a House bill pending in Congress, H.R. 3100, carried by Representative Don Edwards of San Jose. And this would establish a neutral commission publicly to look into this on the national level.
I would be delighted if where I work in Whittier, people used a lot more marijuana and a lot less methamphetamine and a lot less alcohol.
Well, that's I think, a very good argument can be made in favor of legalization of marijuana.
Guys want to argue about cocaine, heroin, I'll listen to the arguments. But marijuana, it's absolutely appalling to me that this is illegal.
We need to take our monies and put them on the front end of our problems and give people jobs, educate our children, educate them what drugs will do and can do to you. Let them see what drugs have done to the families and to the inner cities. Let them see what drugs have done to people on top. These are the people that are walking and getting fat, dumb, and happy, while the people on the bottom are going to jail. And we're talking about 3 strikes and you're out. We already have 3 strikes against us because we're on the bottom. So we need to take a good high look at what we're doing instead of running in circles and do something positive. And I'll leave it at that. God bless y'all.
The people that are appointed to public office will do what the law says, and the only ones that are going to be able to change the law are us. So get involved, be a citizen. Thank you. Thank you for coming.